We live in a world where several nations hold significant power on the global stage. But have you ever wondered why the US dollar, out of all the currencies, became the global standard? With so many influential countries out there, what made the greenback rise above the rest? Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating history of how the US dollar secured its place at the center of the world's economy. To get to the root of this, we need to step back in time. Let's start with a bit of history. Before we had paper money, the world relied on tangible, durable assets for trade, gold and silver. These precious metals were the backbone of commerce, helping societies overcome the problem of perishable goods and the limitations of barter systems. Gold, in particular, became a standard for trade, as it was universally valued and could be stored without losing its worth. Now, fast forward a few centuries. The international trade system evolved to use paper currency that represented gold reserves. This meant that the value of your paper money was backed by a specific amount of gold stored in a vault somewhere. Countries could trade with one another using these notes, confident that they were as good as gold, literally. But things took a dramatic turn after World War I. The war left Europe devastated and its economies in tatters, while the United States emerged as a new global powerhouse. The US was now the world's largest economy and a major creditor, giving it significant leverage on the world stage. The US dollar started to gain ground as an international currency, but it wasn't until World War II that the greenback truly cemented its dominance. In 1944, as the war was winding down, representatives from 44 allied nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to establish a new global financial system. The US, being in the strongest economic position, proposed that the US dollar should become the world's reserve currency, backed by gold. Other countries' currencies would be pegged to the dollar, which in turn was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. This gave the dollar a rock-solid foundation and made it the centerpiece of global trade. So why did the US dollar become the international currency? One word: stability. The US economy was the most stable and robust at the time, and the dollar, backed by gold, was seen as a safe and reliable medium for international transactions. But there was another factor: oil. In the 1970s, the U.S. made a crucial agreement with Saudi Arabia. The kingdom would sell its oil exclusively in U.S. dollars in exchange for security guarantees and economic cooperation. This deal, known as the petrodollar system, meant that any country wanting to buy oil had to hold U.S. dollars. It's hard to overstate how significant this was. It created a constant global demand for dollars and further entrenched its status as the world's dominant currency. But things took a surprising twist in 1971 when President Richard Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard. This meant that the dollar was no longer directly tied to gold reserves, a move known as the Nixon shock. Many thought this might weaken the dollar's position, but it didn't. Instead, the U.S. dollar maintained its dominance, largely because of the established trust in the U.S. economy and the ongoing global demand for dollars, especially in oil transactions. The Nixon shock, in fact, allowed the U.S. more flexibility in managing its economy without the constraints of gold.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
The dollar became a fiat currency, meaning its value was based purely on trust in the U.S. government's ability to back it. Despite this, the dollar's dominance in global trade and finance only grew stronger. Here's where it gets interesting. The dominance of the U.S. dollar isn't just an economic story, it's also deeply geopolitical. The U.S. has leveraged its control of the dollar as a powerful tool in global politics. By controlling the world's primary currency, the U.S. can impose economic sanctions, influence trade policies, and even sway international diplomacy. This weaponization of the dollar gives the U.S. a significant advantage on the global stage. But this dominance isn't without its challenges. In recent years, countries like China and Russia, as well as the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have started exploring alternatives to the U.S. dollar. They're interested in creating a new currency for international trade to reduce their dependence dependence on the dollar and, by extension, on U.S. influence. The emergence of a BRICS currency could potentially shift the balance of global trade, though such a change would take time and face many hurdles. So, what does the future hold for the U.S. dollar? It's hard to say. The dollar's dominance has deep roots, but the world is changing rapidly. The rise of digital currencies, growing economic power in Asia, and geopolitical shifts could all play a role in how the global financial system evolves. To sum it up, the U.S. dollar dominates for a mix of historical, economic, and geopolitical reasons. It's backed by the world's largest economy, bolstered by the petrodollar system, and maintained through strategic international agreements and policies. But as with all things in history, nothing is set in stone. The U.S. dollar's reign has been long and powerful, but new challengers are always waiting in the wings. That's all for today's deep dive into the U.S. dollar's dominance. Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to join us next time as we continue to explore the fascinating stories behind the headlines. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those big questions.